Welcome to Community Church Unitarian Universalist. We're delighted to have our special service, the Gospel according to Louis Armstrong. Okay, we'll begin with the wonderful music of Eric Morel-Ensminger.
Shining on the field below. Folks are doing songs, soft and low. Needn't tell me because I know that it's sleeping time down south. The soft winds blowing through the pine trees. Folks down here live a life of ease. When the twilight brings the evening breeze, well, the sleeping time down south. Steamboats on the river coming and going, dashing the night away. With the banjos ringing, the folks are singing, they dance the break of day. Oh, dear old soft land with its arms takes me back here where I belong. I'll find heaven in my mama's arms. Let it sleeping time down south.
Welcome to Community Church Unitarian Universalist. I'm your worship associate, Jim O'Neill, and it's such a joy to be with you today, here in person and online. For those new to our community, we are a progressive, open-minded, and inclusive religious community. We welcome all who are on a spiritual search for truth and meaning. Ours is a faith in action as we do the work of social justice and elevate compassion in our quest to live ethically, recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of every being. Please look to your email for your weekly announcements. We also have an announcement this morning from Michelle Firestone.
Hi, just a quick reminder, we have a congregational meeting immediately following the service. So please just stay where you are right after the service, unless you're not a voting member, and then you can have coffee and refreshments in the fellowship hall. But also, I'm looking for a volunteer to help with my laptop for the congregational meeting because we have it on Zoom. We don't want it on YouTube. So I'm just looking for a volunteer to handle keeping an eye on the laptop and making sure it's pointed up here for the meeting. That's it. Thanks.
We're delighted today to welcome to our pulpit Reverend Melanie Morel-Ensminger. She has the distinction of being the minister who has officially served all of the UU congregations of the greater New Orleans area, including Hammond. She contracted with CCUU as a consulting minister during the transition period several years ago, and now comes to supply preaching with us quarterly. This month, she'll be with us twice with her musician husband, Eric, to present two music-oriented services. Her next Sunday will be Father's Day. Please welcome them both to CCUU.
Our call to worship this morning are words from Louis Armstrong himself. He summarized his whole philosophy of life in the spoken introduction to the recording of It's a Wonderful World that was done the year before he died. And all I'm saying is, see what a wonderful world it would be if only we would give it a chance. Love, baby, love. That's the secret. Yeah. Let's light our chalice this morning with our usual song that you'll find in your order of service.
We light this flame toward the light of truth and light, and the hope of love and unity, and the fire of hope and light.
Got to bring it down a notch. Good morning, everyone. Oh, my goodness. There's a lot of people. My goodness. Welcome, welcome. And I'm going to be talking about Louis Armstrong. Who was he? This is from a little book that Reverend Melanie gave me. It's a little cute book. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to snip it. So, who was Louis Armstrong? Once there was a poor Black boy who grew up in New Orleans in the early years of the 20th century. His name was Louis Armstrong, but people called him Little Louis. To help his family, he did all kinds of jobs. He hunted for bits of brass and tinfoil, and he sold, which he sold to junk dealers. He peddled newspapers on the street, and he ran errands for grown-ups. Louis also formed a singing group with 3 of his friends. The boys stood on the corner and sang. People gave them money. We still see those young kids today. On New Year's Eve, when little Louis was about 12, he and his friends went to sing. They had just finished a song called My Brazilian Beauty and were on their way home. One of his pals took out a cap gun and shot it into the air, which they still do today. He wanted to make noise because it was New Year's Eve. Louis did too. And he had a real gun, which we still do today. He took it out and pointed it up to the sky. Bam, bam, bam. A policeman heard the gunshots. Shooting the gun was very dangerous, and it also is against the law. The police officer took Louis down to the station, and the next day he was sent to the reform school. Reform schools were for boys who were too young to be sent to jail. Now we know that today. Well, it was a colored waifs home, they called it then, but we know it as Melanie's boys' home. just a side note, I worked for Nord for a few years, and I was there on Saturday mornings in the Milne, it's now the Nord administrative offices. So I'm there all by myself, just thinking, making my imagination run. I'm like, my God, I'm sitting in the same place where Louis Armstrong was, singing and learning how to play the cornet. And there's a big tree. I don't know if you've ever been over to Melanie. There's this big oak tree. It's about 300 years old. And I would always go and tap on the tree and say, oh my God, he probably sat here, But this tree saw this, this history in the making. Just side note. Years later, Louis Armstrong remembered that he thought his world was coming to an end then, and it turned out going to the reform school saved his life. While he was in school, he learned to play the cornet. He learned to play it so well that he grew up to become one of the greatest jazz musicians of all time. He composed dozens of songs that had become famous, and his music is still heard and loved today. Now, I've got 2 birth dates for him, so either 1900 or 1901, whichever one you want to go with. He also was born in the black section of New Orleans called Storyville. It was so dangerous that the nickname was called the battlefield. Many people carried guns and knives wherever they went. There was also a lot of crime. Louis's mother, Marianne Armstrong, had to support her children all by herself. Sometimes she worked as a maid, sometimes she went away for days at a time. Louis and his little sister Beatrice were often left with their grandmother. Her name was Josephine, and she had been a slave. Now she made a living washing and ironing clothes for white people. She gave Louis a nickel to pick up and deliver her wash loads. That made him rich. Josephine was very strict, and she made Louis go to the school, to church, to Sunday school, and when he was bad, she swatted his behind with a branch. They still do that today. But later, Louis was grateful for her concern. She wanted to keep him out of trouble because she cared about what happened to him. It was not easy to be a young African-American boy in the early 1900s. It's still like that today. Though slavery had ended in 1865, many white people thought blacks were not as good as white people. They were often treated unfairly. We know that Louis Armstrong was taught to play the trumpet by King Oliver. And he was a leading figure, most everyone knows, of Dixieland jazz. Armstrong performed in New Orleans, followed Oliver to Chicago in 1922, and took a job in New York 2 years later. In 1925, playing and singing his unique gravelly voice, he began his 5 golden years, which jazz aficionados valued as being his finest work. Armstrong subsequently became more famous as a personality and a goodwill ambassador for the United States, and also he enjoyed a career in film. In 1949, he was also King Zulu. Now that would have been fun, right? One of my favorites too is a great kids book too, is What a Wonderful World, and it does how the song came about and everything. Another one I wanted to talk to you about, I'll go on my way, is his relationship with this Jewish family, right? Konofskis. Now they were businessman that he helped, and he would deliver things for him and everything. And they gave him money for a cornet that, he gave him a loan, and he was able to play, and he was able to pay them back. Until the day he died, he wore a Star of David in honor of those people. So I thought that was really beautiful, the connections there. So that is it. That is Mr. Louis Armstrong, and Have a wonderful day. Sing the kids out wherever they may be.
On our knees, may the Spirit of life surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. Now is our sacred time of joys and sorrows. If you're online, you may write your joys and sorrows in the comments section to be read aloud. In person, you may write them on one of the cards being passed out by our greeters. Our interlude song is Wonderful World.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see that blue for me and for you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue, clouds of white, bright blessed day, with dark sacred night. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people passing by. I see friends shaking hands, saying how do you do? They're really saying I love you. I hear babies cry. I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Sing along with it. Come on. I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them blue. From Mary Ann,
A joy, my twin grandsons, Spencer and Connor, celebrated their 27th birthday this week. A joy from Liz Trotter. I found out yesterday that I will be blessed with another grandchild. James will be big brother to a sister in December. A joy to be here for the first time since 1994. Welcome. Good. Delighted you're here. And from Lizzie, a joy to see so many faces this morning. A sorrow my dad's condition continues to worsen. We hope to find some answers this week. We will keep you in our heart and prayer. From Michelle, a joy that I signed a contract to buy a condo right across the bayou from City Park. Please send good juju for my house to sell quickly. From Kathy, it was a joy to be at the Together Louisiana Lighthouse Keepers training yesterday at the New Wine Church in La Place. CCUU was very well represented there. Yeah, I think there were 7 of us, huh? And please, prayers for my cousin's husband undergoing serious surgery in Phoenix tomorrow. And now we light 2 more candles, one for the sorrows that are impacting us so strongly we can't find words for them. And then also for the joy still bubbling up within us. We will hold you in our minds, our thoughts, and our hearts.
Our reading this morning is a transcription of an interview with music critic Stanley Crouch, taken from the PBS series Jazz by Ken Burns, which was recorded on July 1st, 1997. Well, Armstrong was a very different kind of person because he had an ability that has no parallel in Western music. He was both an innovator as an instrumentalist and as a singer. And the way he played changed everything. It provided so many options that music changed dramatically. And everybody had to begin to address the way that he phrased and the quality of the line that he had and the power and flexibility of his sound. But he also sang in a way that changed Americans singing and probably singing around the whole world. That would have been like if all that music Bach could play and write, if Bach could have gotten up from the piano or the organ and start singing on the same level that he was playing, so that everybody would have to go, oh, guess we have to start singing like Bach too. Nobody's ever had that much talent where they had an equal impact as an instrumentalist and as a singer. See, he's like Michelangelo. It's that kind of thing. It's not even explainable. I mean, you can say, okay, he grew up in New Orleans and he played in parades and he, played wakes and he did this and he did that and he heard that. But lots of other people did too. That's the thing we always have to remember. Everybody else who played a trumpet who was born around 1900, 1901 in New Orleans, they all heard the same stuff. But he was another kind of entity of the sort for which we have no explanation. Armstrong just heard stuff on another level. He had unexcelled rhythmic power. When he started playing, whether everybody else could play or not, he could make it happen. You put him in front of a band with mediocre guys, while he's playing, you think they can play. You don't know till he stops playing that they really can't play. But while he's got his horn up to his mouth, they all sound great. He had this astounding lyricism, just this great lyric voice. And then he had this ability to combine with something that was introspective and also the grand gesture. And then he had this incredible sense of humor. So he can have this thing with pathos in it, and then suddenly he can make fun of it. Or he can take something that you think is funny, like the song Laughing Louis, and he can play this unaccompanied trumpet solo that breaks your heart. The trumpet is a sacrificial instrument. It's the most difficult of the wind instruments to play. It's the most demanding, and he played it with a power that it never had before and has not had since. I don't mean people don't play higher than he played, but the sheer force and power that he played with, I mean, he was it. The thing about Armstrong is when you hear him, you hear everything that takes place in the world. When he sings Mac the Knife, it doesn't sound like other people because he grew up around people like that. You know, he saw two women go at each other with razors and slash each other into bloody messes. He saw guys that stuck people with ice picks and knocked people in the head with bricks. He grew up with all of that. But he also saw these incredibly elegant parades. And he played in those occasions where debutante girls would come out in their white dresses with the men all in black tie, and he played for them. And he played at wakes and funerals. He played for royalty and he played for scumbags. And he saw that if enough alcohol has been consumed, the only way you can tell the difference between them is by the cost of their clothes. He knew all of that. He had this epic sensibility. Murray Kempton said of him, "He dares to be all men." And so ends our reading this morning. It's a great joy for me and Eric to be here together to share this service with you. With our schedules, we don't get that many opportunities to share worship. And so we're grateful to present this service to CCUU to spread the good news about Louis Armstrong. And we hope you'll be back again to join us on June 15th for our special Father's Day service. The word gospel means good news. And there is so much good news to tell about Louis Armstrong. He lived a philosophy of life that was down to earth, compassionate, humanist, and universalist. And thus, he fits very well within our Unitarian Universalist faith and movement. Now, choosing the gospel of Louis Armstrong as a topic, that was the easy part. The hard part was deciding which way to go with a story as rich and as long as his. What if I told you about a little black boy born into one of the poorest neighborhoods of New Orleans, known as the notorious Back of Town or Black Storyville, at the start of the 20th century during the rise of evil Jim Crow? A boy whose parents were not married and never married, and whose 15-year-old mother almost certainly, worked at least part of the time as a sex worker. What if I said further that this boy was known as a bad boy who got into trouble with the law and was incarcerated when he was only 11? And what if I said that he never knew his father till he was 13 and they never got along? Wouldn't just the law of averages tell you that such a boy with such a background, with such a start in life, was doomed? But instead, Louis Armstrong grew up to be one of the most creative, most famous, most beloved, most successful, most honored musicians and entertainers in the whole world. How and why that happened is partly due to luck, partly to ingrown talent, and partly to his character and personality. And it's that character and personality I want to tell you about because I think it's his good news. First, a quick note about his name. Louis Armstrong was Louis to himself and to all those who were close to him, including all of his wives. The French-speaking, light-skinned Creoles of downtown New Orleans might have pronounced their name as Louis or Louis, but he was always stubbornly proud of being an English-speaking, dark-skinned, uptown Negro. As a boy, he got nicknamed Satchel Mouth for his huge lips and wide mouth, which was later shortened to the familiar Satchmo. He got other nicknames too about the size of his mouth. One was Dipper Mouth, which was shortened to Dip. Later on, as he grew older, many in the music world called him Pops for his genial habit of calling anyone Pops whose name he didn't know or couldn't remember. Nobody but white people who didn't know him called him Louis. So today I'll be using the names he preferred. Terry Teachout did the research and found baptismal records in a Catholic church in New Orleans that show that Louis Armstrong was born on August 4th, 1901, the natural, that is, illegitimate son of William Willie Armstrong and Mary Ann, pronounced Mayanne Albert, in Jane's Alley, now, ironically or what, the site of Orleans Parish Prison. Louis never knew his real birthday, and so chose one he liked, and that sort of fit his mother's story of the night he was born. She recalled that while she was in labor, she heard explosions, and he took that to be fireworks. So he always claimed his birthday was 4th of July, which really pleased him. But New Orleans police records show a gunfight near his mother's home on August the 4th. The date he mistakenly thought was his birthday became legal record when he registered for the draft in 1918, and thus has been repeated over and over ever since. When Louis was a baby, his mother gave him to his grandmother to raise in a neighborhood so rough and tough, it was called the battlefield. And although he had been baptized in a Catholic church, on Sundays his grandmother took him to her Baptist church, and there he learned to sing hymns with gusto. He later wrote in his autobiography, "The whole congregation would be wailing like mad. That, I guess, is how I acquired my singing tactics." As early as age 5, he contributed to his family by doing, as you've heard, anything he could to earn money, starting with laundry deliveries, running errands, and working with a Jewish peddler family, the Karnofskys, on their rag cart. And later he drove a coal wagon right up until the time he was able to learn his living by his horn. Side note, the building that housed the Karnofsky pawn shop in Lewis's old neighborhood was demolished both by Hurricane Ida in 2021 and by decades of neglect, even though the building had been recognized as a historic landmark since 2002. Sadly, it's just one of hundreds of important historic sites the city has failed to save over the years. For most of his life, in honor of his relationship and the love he shared with the Karnofsky family, Louis wore a gold Star of David pendant around his neck. Louis was loyal to his mother his whole life, admiring her for supporting her family despite her circumstances. In his autobiography, he even maintained that if his mother turned tricks, he never knew it. Although they lived in a one-room apartment, and he conceded that he had quite a few so-called step-paws over time. Until Mayanne died in 1927, he made sure to regularly send his mother support money. And as a further sign of his sense of family responsibility, when he was just a teenager himself, Louis adopted the orphaned baby of his mother's second cousin and supported him all the rest of his life. Perhaps the fact that he himself had no real father made him even more willing to be a good father to Clarence. Despite how hard he worked all his life to earn it, his generosity with money was legendary. In 1964, his manager complained that Louis gave away between $500 to $1,000 every damn week. Louis wrote in his autobiography that he couldn't understand guys who spent money buying 30 suits. Louis said, "You could only wear them one at a time." And he said the moths would eat them up before the suits wore out. Louis was always a soft touch, especially for musicians down on their luck, looking for that next gig. He could always relate to that. In childhood, in his neighborhood, Louis heard a lot of music. Jazz was being invented right before his eyes and ears, and everyone could hear the sounds pouring out of open windows. And what sounds they were! From sweet and tender to low down and sexy funky. Louis heard and learned to distinguish between the first of the great black cornetists, Buddy Bolden, often credited with the invention of jazz, who, and I have to say this, whose home, by the way, is falling to ruin on First Street, despite being owned by successful local musician P.J. Morton, and shame on him. But Louis could tell the difference just by listening between Buddy Bolden, Bunk Johnson, and Joe Oliver. Cutting contests were held for horn players, with the winner being publicly declared the king. Both Bolden and Oliver would earn that title in their turn. Around age 10, Louis began to get into minor trouble. He dropped out of school and started hanging out with the pimps and thieves and gamblers in his neighborhood, hustling for money. As you've heard, him and 3 other kids formed a corner singing group and brought home real money, about $1.50 every night, the equivalent of around $23 today. They were actually quite good. Bunk Johnson told Sidney Bechet, "I want you to go hear this little quartet on the street, how they sing and harmonize." Even then, Louis was an innovator, and it might have led to something, but fate intervened. Caught up in the excitement of New Year's Eve 1912, Louis stole his mother's pistol and shot it into the air. And he had the luck, good or bad, you can decide, to be immediately pinched by a New Orleans cop. He spent the night in grown-up jail and was sentenced to a term at what was called then the Negro Waif's Home. His arrest was noted in a New Orleans newspaper. It could have been a disaster, but instead it was a stroke of good fortune. While Waif's Home director Captain Jones was indeed a strict disciplinarian, he was also an idealist who believed that all children should be given a chance to turn their lives around. What a concept. The captain, like the Jewish peddler before him, became one of the older men that Louis looked up to. The captain provided structure and discipline, and the dropout street kid wanted nothing more than to earn a place in the Waif's Home brass band. By the summer of 1913, he was in the band, and the band leader became the third in a long line of older father figures to Louis. He said later, "Me and music got married at the home." They never got divorced either, and each of his 3 wives had to accept second place in his life. Now, unfortunately for the future, Louis had formed bad musical habits from teaching himself to blow a horn. Like many self-taught brass players, even today, he had incorrect placement of the mouthpiece against his mouth, what trumpet players call embouchure, or more informally, chops, and it plagued him all his life. He never learned to produce his characteristic lip trill by flexing his jaw or rocking his fingers. Instead, he shook the horn hard against his lips. It might not have mattered, except that Louis always pushed himself so hard and expected so much of his playing. It often resulted in torn up and split lips, which was to cause him much grief, ending gigs with swollen and bleeding lips. But as Eric tells me, everyone, whether musician or not, must learn to work around and work with whatever is the given in their life. Maybe if Louis had learned the right way to blow a horn, well, maybe he wouldn't have turned out to be the great Satchmo. Who can know? Handicap or not, the way Louis played changed jazz forever. And it's a lesson to all of us. Louis was so happy at the Negro Waifs home that when his term was up, he was reluctant to leave. On another side note, as Cynthia has mentioned, the colored waifs home later relocated to Gentilly and was renamed the Milne Boys Home, open to boys of both races. And the Unitarian note here is that its programs were improved and updated by Gene Gordon, the crusading reformer who belonged to First Unitarian Church in New Orleans. Milne was badly damaged in Katrina, but is finally now rehabbed and is a Nord Center and gym, and where Eric and I vote. Louis did visit the new location. He was never incarcerated there, but he visited it as an adult, knowing that it was the successor to the Waifs home, and while there spoke so highly of the captain and the band leader who had meant so much to him in his life. Coming out from the home, Louis began to work as a musician at night, usually till around 4 a.m., but it was neither lucrative nor steady. To make sure of a regular income, he continued to work a 10-hour day hauling coal. You probably want to know what kind of music Louis was playing. And the answer is whatever anybody who was paying wanted. What we call jazz now was in its earliest stages and had been played in New Orleans since just the turn of the 19th century. But that was not all that local musicians played. Bands needed to be able to play classical, polkas, waltzes, ragtime, and other styles printed or handwritten on sheet music and played note for note at formal jobs at the private homes of rich white people. And then there was the traditional music of the New Orleans Marching Brass Band. But then there was also the slow, sensual, wailing blues and the improvisational transition music that evolved into jazz. Some Black musicians could read music and get society gigs. Others played by ear and by feel, as many do even today. Louis had an advantage, having learned to read music at the Waifs home. Now, at this time, Louis came to the attention of cornet great Joe Oliver, the latest of the New Orleans cornet kings, who gave him his first really formal from a professional horn lessons. Louis grew close to Joe Oliver and his wife and was treated like the son they never had, another one of Louis's father figures. And when Oliver left New Orleans in 1918, Louis was given Oliver's place in Kid Ory's band and was soon working full-time as a musician. And that same year, he married for the first time a good-looking sex worker named Daisy Parker. It was neither a long nor a happy marriage. In 1920, Louis got a job on the New Orleans to Minneapolis run of the Streckfus steamboat. It was his first time ever being outside of New Orleans. And while on the steamboat, caught a bad cold that made him hoarse. And many people say his gravel voice dated from this time. On the steamboat, Louis ate so many regular meals. It was the first time in his life he had access to regular meals. He gained so much weight, he had to buy all new clothes. Many contemporary reports tell of audiences going wild for Louis's swinging horn style. It was the most money Louis had ever made in his young life, and his technique improved so that he was playing well solos originally difficult for clarinet and piccolo. A pianist from Cape Girardeau in Missouri heard him and was blown away. You can't imagine such energy, such musical fireworks as Louis Armstrong on that boat. The next year, back in New Orleans, Louis became a full-fledged member of the well-known Tuxedo Brass Band, which still exists today. Finally, he had been accepted by what he called the real musicianers of the city. And he said, I was as proud as though I had been hired by John Philip Sousa. He was still talking about it 50 years later, calling his time with the Tuxedo Brass Band a thrilling pleasure. He later claimed he would have been happy if this milestone had been all there was to his music career. Well, even if that were true, Louis's talent and drive was to take him far from the Crescent City, to Chicago, to New York City, to Los Angeles and the movies, to touring the country, suffering the many indignities of racial segregation, on to Europe and to Africa. He brought to the world the New Orleans technique of scatting, vocalizing without words, which he did not invent and never claimed to, but which he certainly popularized and made famous. I guess we can all be grateful that Satch did not give in to that temptation to stay in his hometown. Along the way, he married 2 more times. His second wife was unfaithful with a friend and bandmate of Satch's, but characteristically, he did not cut either of them out of his life forever. He had run-ins with the mafia in Pops's day, and even today in some places, it's next to impossible to be in a professional nightclub musician or entertainer without running into the mob. And he endured the blatant racism of his time, but he endured it in his own way. A few years before he died, one memory was especially vivid. Years ago, I was playing Lubbock, Texas, when this white cat grabs me at the end of the show. He's full of whiskey and trouble. He pokes me in my chest and he says, I don't like N-words. I never say that word, but the guy from Texas said the word. These 2 cats with me was gonna practice Thanksgiving carving on that dude. But I said, no, let the man talk. Why don't you like us, Pops? And would you believe he couldn't tell us? So he apologizes and he begins crying and carrying on. And dig this, that fella and his whole family come to be my friends. When I go back through Lubbock, Texas for many years, they would make old Satchmo welcome and treat him like a king. Well, that story tells us a lot more about Pops's loving, forgiving nature than about that bigoted Texan. At one point, he was probably the most famous Black man in the whole world. He made it his mission to play for the people and to give them joy. He met and played for thugs and socialites, kings of New Orleans Carnival. He himself was thrilled to be named King of Zulu in 1949, and he played for real kings. Playing before King George and Queen Mary of England in 1932, he grinned and pointed his horn at the king and said, "This one's for you, Rex," and then blew his head off. And through it all, he treated everyone he met with the same affable courtesy and humor. It was characteristic of him that when he played at a carnival bash in New Orleans the year he reigned as King Zulu, his first wife, Daisy, much the worse for wear, demanded entrance to the party, saying she was Mrs. Armstrong. And all those years later, and all that water under the bridge, Louis good-naturedly said to let her in. Pops Armstrong died at home in bed next to his beloved third wife, Lucille, on July 6th, 1971, after months of battling illness and chronic pain. He had continued to perform despite failing health only months before his death. Seeing him exhausted and bleeding in his dressing room, a fellow musician said he looked like the saddest guy in the world. A fact never guessed at by the adoring throngs who still packed in to hear his hits and bask in the light of his megawatt grin. He had told his doctor, "My whole life, my whole soul, my whole spirit is to blow that horn." He would not have wanted to live if he couldn't play that horn. Dressed in a suit, a white handkerchief in his hand, his body lay in state as 25,000 people filed past. His obituary in the New York Times started on the front page and ran for some 4,000 words. Like so much written about him before and since, it was filled with inaccuracies. But it did at least contain some of his own words. "I never tried to prove nothing, just always wanted to give a good show. My life has been my music, it's always come first, but the music ain't worth nothing if you can't lay it on the public. The main thing is to live for that audience, because what you're there for is to please the people." And please the people he did for close to 60 years. At the end of the acclaimed biography that formed one of the two most important sources of this sermon, Terry Teachout writes, "Faced with the terrible realities of the time and place into which he had been born, he did not repine, but returned love for hatred and sought salvation in work. There lay the ultimate meaning of his epic journey from squalor to immortality. His sunlit, hopeful art, brought into being by the labor of a lifetime, spoke to all people in all conditions and helped make them whole." That was the gospel of Louis Armstrong, and that's the message I want us to take away from this service. To work hard at whatever talent we have been granted, to bring love and light to other people, to forgive, to be generous, to let go of bitterness and anger, to treat all people with the same respect, to help heal brokenness. That was his gospel, and it ought to be ours. So might this be. Amen, Ashe, Shalom, Salam, Namaste, blessed be.
Thanks for that wonderful good news. Community Church is a self-sustaining congregation. Members and friends' generosity help us do the sacred work of bringing justice, spirituality, and compassion to our community and beyond. You can give online by text or in person this morning. See the information on the back of your order of service for online giving.
I want to point out that Lewis's song, Strutting with Some Barbecue, which was written by his second wife, is not about walking around with a chicken leg in your hand. Back in the day, there were a lot of slang terms for a good-looking woman. A good-looking woman was a yard. As one musician once explained to me, because you play in a yard. And barbecue was another way of describing a really delicious woman. So strutting with some barbecue is not about food. Our words for benediction are partially taken from fellow New Orleanian Mahalia Jackson. If you don't like Louis Armstrong, you don't know how to love. In our own lives, let us strive to be as full of soul, as full of humor, as full of generosity and compassion, and as free from bitterness and resentment as Louis Armstrong. May the wide open spirit of Louis Armstrong teach us all how to live lives full of love. And our closing hymn, you know it, we all knew it, Louis Armstrong knew it, it's the Saints.
Please join in the chalice extinguishing. We extinguish the chalice here that it might glow gently in our hearts. May it light your path as you leave this place. May it guide your way until we are together again. I'll remind you there will be a meeting immediately following the service.
Oh, I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Thank you for being my worship assistant.